slightly less than an hour, is about protection beyond the perimeter. And seeing all my other peers speak before me, you heard the words perimeter come up a few times. You've seen some of the companies' logos and attack techniques that I'll speak about, but I chose a different approach, kind of a storytelling presentation. If you guys have any questions, because this is a slightly smaller forum, if you feel the urge to ask me questions during the presentation, feel free to do so. So our world is changing, our world is evolving. As some of my colleagues earlier said, there's Internet of Things, there's connectivity, there's applications, mobile applications for basically everything. We even have a self-driving car in San Francisco already. And there's other aspects. There's money involved, and there's terror, and the world around us and our business has changed dramatically since back in the days when the first firewall came out back in the early 90s. But before I actually talk about what's happening today, I want to quickly go through a memory lane and talk about how the world has evolved. So while putting this presentation together, I did some research, and it turns out that the first hack was actually in 1903. It was carried out by a guy named Neville, who disrupted the Morse code presentation, which was supposed to show encrypted Morse code transmitted over a wireless channel. And what ended up happening is that the message that came across the speakers was abusive language about the person actually presenting the Morse code itself. So it goes back in time to 1903 when hackers started taking more active parts in business. If we jump forward 90 years, and we jump to 1993. If you guys remember the Firewall 1 that came out of Checkpoint, stateful inspection firewall, that was the first firewall to protect our organization. So things back then were pretty easy. We had a firewall, we had our business, we were protected from the outside world. Pretty simple. Guys, come in. By the way, funny enough, in 1993, there's a guy called Kevin Paulson, which you may be familiar with. He's a famous ethical hacker now, who needed to buy a car but didn't feel like actually spending the money, so he hacked into the telephone system of a radio show, made sure all his phone calls were the ones coming in, and he made a phone call into the radio show and won the lottery around a car. He was the 19th caller to dial in. Funny enough. So the perimeter. There's some organizations that are outside, some vendors. There's some vendors that are not here, but the competitive landscape around the perimeter, around firewalls, around IPSs, around the technologies we use to protect the perimeter have reached an elite state. We are seeing technologies compete with each other to protect our perimeter, to protect our applications, to protect inside the perimeter, that they've really reached a good state of technology. They're really hard to penetrate at this stage. And what actually happened is that our perimeter has become fortified with high walls, if you may, and so hackers have turned away from trying to brute force their way into a perimeter and tried to find a different way. And aside from the hackers changing the way they behave, there are also different motives. We have terror, we have lots of money, as the other speakers mentioned. We'll talk about some examples in a second. With that said, the attack surface has changed. There are new attack vectors. There are hackers around us all the time. People that you and I may know, people that live their daily lives like normal people. But on the cyberspace, they do different activities. And the way they do it is slightly different than they used to. Because now, our business is no longer limited to the perimeter. It's no longer about emails and phone calls and face-to-face conversations. There's a whole new satellites of communications with the outside world, which are being utilized. And the customer engagement on these channels has changed as well. So now it's really popular to have a Twitter account as your support forum. So most of the SaaS products that are sold online today would have a Twitter account where they'll announce support issues, or they will speak to their paying customers to support them through the Twitter account. And so the engagement with our customers has moved to the outside of the perimeter. So people engage with us on Twitter, as I mentioned, but on our website, on our blogs. Content marketing is the strongest form of marketing today. So everyone's blogging, everyone's commenting. And this touches a few places which I'll talk about in the presentation. Obviously the attackers are all around us, and they see the engagement, and they use those channels to try and get into the organization. So let's now dive into the reality and look at recent events and see how they unfold in front of us. So in 2014, late around November in 2014, a few hackers hacked their way into Giga, sorry. Giga is a commenting system that is inserted as jQuery, as external code, which is dynamic into lots of leading websites. They have the same platform as Outbrain, which are content suppliers, as Taboola, if you guys are familiar with the names. So basically these days, when we build websites, we don't code the entire website ourselves. We use jQuery codes which dynamically reaches out. Guys, you want to have a seat? Which dynamically reaches out to third-party content suppliers and third-party vendors and brings in dynamic code into our website. Now, what happened with Giga was that the Syrian Electronic Army hacked the way into Giga. They got access to their admin system, and by doing that, by breaching their systems, they could get access to all 50 million accounts and websites that were using their code. So instantly, customers like Walmart and Forbes and NBC, and the list goes on, were infected by a vulnerability or by a breach that had nothing to do with them. And if they weren't actually sitting down on their website monitoring it in real time, this would go unnoticed until somebody would report back and talk about it. Twitter, with everything that's happening with ISIS these days, and everything that's happening with what happened in France a couple of months ago, Twitter has been I think the most hit platform in terms of spamming and malware in attempts as a platform. And I speak to customers on a daily basis, and every morning I would wake up to another event where I see a Twitter account being hacked. And these two examples, Chipotle, which is a fast food chain in the US, and Newsweek, is something that happened 3 or 4 weeks ago. Basically, there are some examples there that I'll show you in more details when we go further down the presentation. YouTube is another form, another channel where people and organizations are being attacked. I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you guys have heard of the breach and the defacement of the Central Command of the US Army in YouTube. Basically, ISIS, or one of their the groups that are supporting ISIS, managed to get their way access into YouTube, and instead of the videos that they had on there, they changed it to beheading videos and comments about racist comments about normal people like us. And then there's another form which is we see a lot of is DNS and attacks on DNS in the form of changing a record forwarding. So if we have say if I'm a smaller company and I register my domain on GoDaddy, and I don't know if you guys are familiar, but GoDaddy are well known for their hosting, but less so for their security measures. They don't have two-factor authentication, and brute forcing their way into GoDaddy is not such a hard mission. Basically, I could brute force my way into GoDaddy, change the DNS records, and all of a sudden I've got a spoofed website that I don't even know about. So monitoring those DNSs is crucial, and two such victims is the New York Times and Twitter themselves, where they had the DNS records changed, and only after a while actually knew about it. Now, the unique thing about all these events is that they happen beyond the perimeter. They happen outside of the perimeter. They happen on assets that either we control or that are controlled by third-party vendors. And it's hard to know when these things happen, because at the end of the day, it's spoofed. It all looks the same for us, for me as a marketing manager. I see my website, it looks exactly the same, but the links and the pictures and the videos that I have on my website could either be have malware in them, or have a phishing scheme behind them, and I'm liable for that. So what does protection beyond the perimeter actually mean? There's 3 steps which I'll discuss in terms of protection beyond the perimeter. And the first, and maybe the most intriguing, because this is somewhat like an FBI-based action movie, is intelligence. And you know, I mentioned earlier about people around us and people that we know that take active part in the cyber crime, in the cyber realm. And here we have a few examples of the groups that we track. We have an analyst team that sits in our SOC using our Argos platform that tracks these people 24/7. They track it for our customers, and we are able to see their actions, identify their key members, track their activities and the techniques that they use, and even track the tools that they use. In this account, for example, we have the Mecca, which is the Middle East Cyber Army. They're actually the people behind what happened in France. They actually supported the terrorists that killed the people in the grocery store and the newspaper. And these guys, aside from being active in terrorist schemes and terrorist attacks, they're very active on a daily basis. So these guys have an average of 9 to 10 defacements per day of websites where they deface, they put in their logo, they have a very nice music background that's playing. I could show you guys. And basically that's what they do. They just disturb our day-to-day lives. The most recent attack that they had was on a website of a municipality in Quebec, Canada. This happened 2 weeks ago. And they're relatively small, so they're range between 10 to 100 members in that group. There's another more well-known group, Anaghost. How many of you guys heard of Anaghost? None? 2, 3. Cool. So Anaghost is much more popular. It's been in the news. People who follow cybersecurity and intelligence know about Anaghost. They're even a bigger beast. They do bad things, far more bad things than Mecca. And recent hacks, you can see some big names. I hope you guys can see at the back, right on the right-hand side there. Their most recent attack was the defacement of the Bar Association in Israel. Actually happened last night. Their size is hundreds, so they have hundreds of threat actors who are actively attacking us globally, and we're tracking them. We're seeing them, we're profiling them, we know who the people behind them are. And here are some examples. So here are 3 faces, or 3 images of people who are involved with either of these 2 groups. Obviously there are thousands more, but here are just some examples. And there's the Humada El-Bes. He's a guy that's very active in social media. He has over 7,000 followers. People listen to him. People see what he does. He publishes pastebin posts and Twitter posts on a daily basis. There's a guy in the middle who actually is one of the founders of Anaghost. He's about 25. He's got very activist roots and political ideas which drive him to what he does. And then Virus and Worm, another guy who's really active in the cyber scene. So this is the type of profiling that we have. We have information about all the guys that are active, what groups they belong to, and what techniques they use. So you want to see some examples? put together a few examples, a few older ones because it has private information that I didn't want to share if it was new. But this example that we can see here is a guy ordering on a Tor network, on a hidden network. He's ordering to get the private details of the guy named Ricky. Basically, the whole operation is listed there. They say, give me the docs, which is his private information. Once I'll see the docs, send me proofing. I'll make the payment by Bitcoin, and then you can get rid of the docs. And this is an operation that we see on a daily basis. Black markets are thriving. Communications within private Tor forums are happening daily, and this is where we're active too, where we track these guys. Another example that we picked up on is a Twitter tweet, where it's actually a closed-off Twitter group, so there's only 3-4 followers in that group. One of the guys tweeted that Samsung sucks, and the reason he said that, and I don't know if you guys can see, but this is you got access to shell access to one of Samsung servers. You hit the sensitive information, but at the end of the day, he's active in trying to breach large corporations. And more recently, this is from 3 days ago, I think. You'll see some of the domains there, Williams Hill and MI5 and some of the local domains. This is a DDoS campaign. These guys are talking about a DOS attack on these websites, and we see this a lot. We see this numerous times a day. We see different campaigns targeting different countries, and just an example from real time. So intelligence is great, but the realm of the cyberspace and the internet is huge. There are public forums, private forums. There's Tor, there's websites, there's social media, and there are thousands and thousands of entities which you need to track on a daily basis. You need to profile them, you need to understand their motives, you have to understand their techniques, understand the tools they're using, actually do the reverse engineering on the tools to understand what they'll be able to achieve with what they're doing. So right now we're tracking about over 10,000 threat actors. There's about 2,000 tools that we've had a look at. Some of them we've actually dismantled and looked at what they can achieve. Thousands of techniques and various campaigns, be it Ops France, Ops UK, Ops Israel, and so forth. So the channels, the sources where we get this information vary. They start from IRC channels where people communicate. We have the ability to actually hide our identity and hide our customer's identity and dive into IRC channels where communications are happening. So once we get a flag that there's something going on, we can actually dive down into an IRC chat and track what is going on behind the IRC chat. Dark web, access to Tor channels, I2P. Basically, all the channels and all the different protocols that hide you, hide your entity, we have access to those. You guys could have access as well. It's a time-consuming and resourceful task. Forums, both closed and open. People, I forgot his name, the guy from IBM. He showed the forum talking about hacking tools and hacking techniques and training for hackers. That's just one example of millions, as I said. There are just enormous amounts of places where people communicate and talk about how to hack. Social media, showed you an example of Twitter, but it's also on Facebook. It's happening everywhere. Facebook are trying to mitigate the problem. They close off pages where they get indications that they have hacking activities behind them, but they're not in real time. These guys get their way, and there's private forums as well on Facebook. And then page sites. Page sites are basically used to swap, to exchange data, textual data, and make sure it's not cached. So if I want to send over to one of my colleagues, I want to send them over 10,000 credentials. I don't want to send it through email. I don't want to send it in various means. I put it on a cache site, on a pastebin site. And then I'll ask the site not to cache it, leave it live for 1 minute, we exchange the data, and then it's gone. So what is actually the key to handling all the data and all the sources, all the information, and why are we actually blind? Because we have guys before me talked about dashboards with red indications. In my honest opinion, I think green indications are far worse. It's just, you can have everything green. You can just color it green and make sure, just be ignorant about what's happening in the outside world. But it's a blinding effect. And just one example, and this is you can find this information on the internet. JP Morgan had a breach, was in October last year, and the breach, the hacker was in there doing his thing, stealing information, tens of millions of account and credentials for over 2 months. And this was going on, and he had all the best technology. He had FireEye in there, and he had the best of firewalls, the best of IPSs. He's doing everything he needed to do in terms of technologies, but he wasn't seeing this. And the reason why they actually saw this at the end was because an external company that was around intelligence came in and said, well, you guys, haven't you noticed that someone was actually in your network? And so they did. And like a previous speaker said, the transition when you're the size of JP Morgan, the transition, the time it takes you to mitigate and swap the technology and swap the processes and do the training is just years. So this was the 2 months from the moment that they were breached till they knew about it, but then you had a few months after that as well until they actually made the change and managed to really mitigate the breach. Now, with the collection of intelligence, you have 5 steps which are known for collecting intelligence. You have the planning part and the collection, and then you have the processing and analysis. And this usually, and the reason why there's human and machine on both sides, because the intelligence world is divided. And when I talk about these 5 stages, it's usually related to human intelligence. I could be an analyst sitting in front of a screen, having various entities on Tor networks, and surf around and collect the intelligence, cross links, make the link analysis, and understand the entire picture. Or at the end of the scale, I could be a provider of malicious URLs and malicious IPs that I know about. But somewhere in the middle, you have to unite the two and make sure that you can get all the human intelligence in a fast way, as though it would be same way we get feeds of IP and URLs. And this is what we're trying to get, is to automate the entire process of collecting the data, understanding it, and then distributing it correctly. So not just the noise that the guys talked about, but actually providing actionable and targeted information to our customers so they can do something with it. The next phase of protection beyond the perimeter is online assets. Online asset protection, we talked about a few of the assets, but I kind of want to show you a visual effect of what an organization looks like. So we chose Kayak as an example. We took Kayak, they have an online business. And what we can see is that the different parts and the different colors will explain just how distributed their presence on the internet is, and how much of it is not really protected, and how much of it actually allows access into the organization. So if we look at the social part of Kayak, they have a Twitter account, they have a Facebook account. On the Facebook, they have various pages that they manage. They have Google+, and they have LinkedIn. They have YouTube. Then that stretches on to the stakeholders, to the key members of the executive team, people who would be targets in case of an attack. And these guys are private people like us. Obviously, they're high up there, but they need to be tracked. They need to be protected because they are now targets. They also have the domains. So the domains, I would separate that into the website, blog, and different landing pages that they have. And on the websites, they would have jQueries, as we mentioned, and third-party assets that are sitting on their websites and dynamically changing, which need to be tracked. They also have their blog, which, with this specific example, I don't know if you can see this on the right side of the screen. You can't, but it's WordPress based. WordPress, and I'll show you some example in a second, is the most targeted content management system out there. It's basically impossible to close it off in terms of security. And iframes, this is all this information we actually extracted, and you guys can do this with every organization. It's called the site's called buildwith.com. It pulls out all the information about a website, shows you what they use, on what technologies they use, and this is an iframe which is used to show content from that loads another web page. So liability and DNS changes and different SDKs and jQueries which are being used either by third parties or open libraries which they use, which have vulnerabilities in them, and you've got to keep track of the jQuery that you're using to make sure that you're not vulnerable. Not to mention WordPress and plugins, and Drupal and plugins. Plugins, if you guys are familiar with it, it's little tools that are attached to content management systems, which are built by private people. No Q&A, no surveillance, no one's actually testing them for security measures. Some examples of what would be what you can see in terms of Twitter, Facebook, and social in general. Here's the CFO of Twitter. They communicate between themselves in the company via their Twitter accounts. He was hacked into, I think, a few months ago, and all they did on his account is spammed his account, and he has quite a few followers. But spamming is just the beginning. You can also move on and see defacements. So I mentioned earlier, we talked about Chipotle, racist comments and tweets, and then curses on Obama and his government. This ended up being a 3-4 hour event, which Chipotle had to then apologize for. And we talked about the PR and marketing side of these things. This is it, and this is happening every day. And then Newsweek, a full defacement of the Twitter page, so like this for a few hours. And this is just defacements and spamming. I think we can all live with. There's another aspect, which is malware and phishing, and hackers use our outreach. Say if we take an example, we take Apple for example, and if I manage to get my hands on the Twitter account of Apple, all I have to do is put a URL in there that says, take a look at the next iPhone or iPhone 7 new images. And within seconds, I have millions of people pressing this link. Now, even if we're training our people, our human resource, to not press on any link, by default, Twitter has a URL shortener, so you can't even make sense. You can't even see that URL looks dodgy. So that's obviously a much more frightening event, and the liability there is quite extensive. So we talked about WordPress and how vulnerable it is. Some of the headlines around WordPress, this is really recent, with everyone targeting France for some reason. There's tens and hundreds of thousands of websites based in France which are based on WordPress. Very vulnerable and open to attacks. All you have to do as an attacker is to just scan the internet and find these holes and take use of them. We mentioned Gigi earlier, Outbrain. Outbrain was actually an event that we had some part in it. I want to talk about the secret stuff, but if you look up the attack that Outbrain had on the internet, you'll be able to access this information. And basically, the attackers wanted to get, not to Outbrain, but to their customers. They managed to get hold of sensitive information that allowed them to access their admin portal, and through that they changed the code. And as with Gigia, they had millions of websites which were breached and vulnerable because of the code that they were pulling dynamically. This changes every time a website loads. It's not something that you can track. Every time a website loads, it's a dynamic code that gets into your website. They changed and managed to deface quite a few people. And then defacements of your website. That's this. I mean, if you guys know the website Hstone, you can step in there and see what's happening. Hstone has tracks all the hacking and defacements that are happening in the world. And these are just a few examples from a few days ago, but it's open source information. You guys can take a look and see what's happening there. So DNS records. We mentioned DNS earlier, but I wanted to bring up this example because it's really interesting. RSA conference last year, we had there was a presentation by a guy that was actually mocking the hacking methods of the Syrian Electronic Army, and in return, the next day they had hacked into the conference presentations, and they managed to actually deface the websites and then some of the many sites that we're using on the screens at the conference. So it just shows you how easy it is to get access to DNS registers. The Twitter example, the way it was done, and there's other examples that were done in this way. So basically, sending a fax to GoDaddy or to your DNS register, asking to change your DNS records or to change the admin, because that's one of the ways that they allow. I mean, if you take the effort to write down on a fax, to actually fax it to someone, they'll think it's legitimate and they'll change the admin. So getting your way into DNS register is pretty simple. So what we're saying is you need to track these things. So we need to track these things in real time before they cause any damage. And then last aspect of DNS and the troublesome factor of these attacks is email spoofing. Once you have control of the DNS, you can spoof all the emails. So we talked about phishing and how easy it is to get phishing attempts into an organization. This is one of the ways. If you get an email from your colleague, you're far more open to pressing a link because he's a friend, he wants to show you an Excel, and it's all good. Now, aside from all the events that are worrying us and should be concerning, we have regulations. And this is not just in the financial sector or in a specific sector that we're talking about regulations. We see regulations around social media and online presence on all verticals. We have the American Bar Association, we have the FDA, we have food regulators, basically insurance and all the vectors are affected by this, and regulators are far more active in changing the world that we're active in terms of social media. The last piece of the puzzle, and we're 3 slides away from the finish line, is testing a perimeter. So we said the technologies have adapted and have moved and are very competitive. So the technology itself is very strong, but it all boils down to the 3 elements that were mentioned earlier as well that we were listening in: people, processes, and products and technologies. And testing the stamina or the resilience of the organization is key to making sure that the perimeter that you have set up with those high walls is actually effective in defending the organization. And what you can see here, and this is there's a reference to where this is from if you guys want to take a look. On the right-hand side, the orange circles are the ones that are the most famous attacks, and the numbers below the names are the numbers of records that were stolen from each organization. And this is just last year, this is a 2014 line. What you can see is that lots of records have been stolen to start off with. But if you look on the right-hand side, what you'll note is that most of these attacks, and the ones that are missing is because they had other they had insiders and other credentials that were stolen. But I've filtered this down into 2 aspects of places where the organization was hacked and places where the security was just not good enough. And we see very big names out there. There's Uber and there's other players which are gigantic in size now in terms of the risk that's involved with them, and it's pretty frightening. JP Morgan, back to them, they had 76 million household and small businesses data that was stolen. And their CEO, whose name is Jamie Dimon, he said that even though the bank has fortified its defenses against the attacks, the battle is continual and likely to never end. And this is true. This is true with every organization that we look at. And the only way to actually continue the defenses and continue to prevail and win the so-called war is to look at these 3 elements. And the reason why I brought this up as the last aspect, because this is actually the perimeter, but it's looking at the perimeter from outside. And what we're doing with our customers is simulating attacks on a perimeter to try and verify how well defended they are. The technologies that they're using, if they're the right technologies, if they have the right products in place, if they're set up correctly, if the configuration is right, if you set up a DLP to stop certain documents from leaving, have you tested all the different scenarios? You have an APT, you have a sandbox that's supposed to protect you against APT attacks and malware. Does it really work for every type of malware? What if it's 0 day? What if it's not 0 day? How do you actually check these elements? And then, aside from the technology, there's the processes. What controls do you have in place? Are you protecting the riskier parts of your business? Are you making sure that the business is gonna strive and live on after the next great attack? And the weakest link in the chain, obviously, is people. We could spend millions and tens of millions on technologies. We can spend millions on training, on setting up the processes and doing gap analysis and understanding where we need different processes and controls to mitigate risk. But at the end of the day, it all boils down to an HR manager or a sales rep that gets an email, presses the link, and you're done. So testing these three elements and continuously doing so and pointing out the weaknesses is a very important link in protecting your organization. By the way, again, while researching this, I came upon an article that talked about that the United Kingdom is actually doing the largest organized terrorist attack simulation. It's done in HMS Belfast, and they had about 80 people simulating attacks back and forth. They had red teams and blue teams trying to attack each other, and they were surveying exactly what was happening. So the idea of simulating attacks and going through this process is very clear to governments. This was me. If you have any questions, we have about 18 minutes left, so feel free.
Yes. How are you going for detecting voice recognition patterns? Because a lot of stuff now is bought by just speaking down the line, so to speak. Not just the passwords, but you're actually conducting a contract verbally over the phone. It's not no written signature to it in some way.
There are lots of aspects which technology doesn't have an answer for as yet. And what we see is that through intelligence, through the right intelligence and being in the right place at the right time, we can mitigate some of these issues. Again, the security world is evolving continuously. And as we grow, and there's another part of the organization which I didn't talk about, which is the services that we provide. But at the end of the day, we will work with our customers to look at new emerging techniques as well.
At the moment, I can open certain things just by voice and speak. If I had tape with my requisite voice in, I could just feed it in and it would start opening stuff up. Because it sounds like enough. If it sounds enough like me.
Yeah, you can authenticate yourself through voice.
But I don't. The amount of clarity, the amount of, I won't go into how it's, but the actual, I can sound different with a cold, and really sound different, and still get this machine to accept me as me.
So that's because it's learnt your tone, it's learnt the way you speak, but speech recognition systems are still not able to authenticate multiple users. So yours has been trained to recognise you, but speech recognition is still not that good to recognise the same system.
I took the recognition portion of Dragon out and tried it, and I can still get away with it.
Yeah, but that's
should be dual factor anyway.
The idea is not, I want to keep this at a high level. At the end of the day, when you're trying to breach into an organization, you'll try various means. Mm-hmm. And once we simulate the attacks, and we understand what the customer needs are, and that one of the attack vectors may be authentication through voice, we'll work with them to close off that gap and see.
But don't you use the appropriate tools to protect your information? If that's the case, you wouldn't use that tool to protect something sensitive.
We're not going to be inventing the wheel for every technology, right?
No, I'm saying you, as a user, you choose not to use things that are vulnerable.
If that's a risk in your organisation, just throw it out.
But you don't have to use speech. For example, Halifax are trialling, I think it's heart rhythm to authenticate customers accessing their accounts because multiple factor authentication is not enough.
So I just met a company that does something similar. They use signature-based authentication, but not the old-style signatures with the path that they choose, but rather the amount of force that you put on the screen and the way that you move your finger. And those guys actually say that if they have the same signature twice, they would not authenticate the person. So it needs to be a specific statistical behavior of. So yeah, it's never ending, and there's many technologies out that they try to help with authentication, which is a major problem in security.
How many people test their networks? You know, because it seems that the people that have breaches then start testing.
It's sad, isn't it?
But the people that don't have any problems are not testing networks.
So I can talk to you about a specific example, Sony. You know, it's also based on verticals. So once Sony happened, we got quite a few phone calls from the entire media scene, and people were stressing because this is, you know, it's a huge event. And this happens a lot. JP Morgan was another event that kind of escalated, but we still see, you know, that there's the Russian bank and 2 weeks ago was throwing out money through the ATMs, and there was over $1 billion stolen in a hack, which is a ridiculous amount of money. People tend to see these things, they learn, and they are more motivated to do things correctly.
Going back to what you said then about using the heartbeat and finger recognition and whatever else, surely you're just pushing it further and further out of your grasp. So you're saying that your perimeter's moving and further away. Well, now you're relying on another company to authenticate your system using a heartbeat. Well, all I need to do now is go after that company who has the heartbeat, and then I'm back in again.
That's true.
You're moving it further and further away. Is not the better way to bring it all back inside your perimeter, instead of relying on, oh, it's great that RSA have my key, but it's a well-documented fact that RSA is now backdoored and has been backdoored for some time.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that the issue is, you know, all these authentication methods. Carbonate, for example, that thing that Kaspersky was talking about the other day, is about circumventing the authentication. So the victim goes through the authentication system, and the hacker goes in with the victim. So it's neutralising the authentication system. So you have 50 authentications. It won't matter because the person who's doing it is the victim, and the hacker goes through with the victim into the system, and then is within the system. And what you have with JP Morgan, for example, is where you had a two-factor authentication system on all of their servers bar one, and the hackers found the one that didn't have. So it got through, and then the system thought that everybody that was in the system had gone through two-factor authentication. So, you know, we've got to start thinking about new ways to stop them getting in and stop them moving around where they're in.
And you've got to understand the risk. Every organization has a different risk in different parts of its business. At the end of the day, it could be, you know, if we take an online gaming as an example, the biggest risk is for the website to go down. And they'll do everything they can in terms of technology, process, and people to stop that from happening. But then there's other facets of the business that, you know, that are less risky. And the same goes for banks and insurance, and every business is different in terms of risk. And the process that needs to be done is to have a gap analysis and understand where are the risks, what technologies are used, and like you said, maybe throw out some of them because they just open up that one person who was not using these factors.
Am I allowed one more?
Sure.
The industry doesn't seem to be so much just for selling things to people, but selling like the long-term maintenance of things so that they can pop in and maintain things, which seems to have yet another long-term effect that they, like the easy one would be like control your heating system, but if it controlled a lot of your business systems, etc., people become more complacent that this was being looked after, and it's being looked after by an outside source doing the maintenance. So you could become reliant upon that source, which would be one business risk, or that source of maintenance could be invaded, which would be another risk.
Target was exactly that. Target was through the POS, the point of sale system. The malware was brought in by an external third party who's doing maintenance works. I think it was, I don't know, POS or their air conditioning, but it's exactly that. And it's part of the risk you need to assess and understand the business who's working with it and what you need.
But the industry is so hungry for the money that much of its software is now being developed so quickly. There are massive gaps in some of the new stuff that's coming out. It's got so many holes in it, it's like a colander.
Yeah, that's true. Which is, I mean, some of our customers include IoT vendors, so they would produce the chips for the IoT devices, and we work with them to try and close those holes. We have a framework for that to make sure that it is somewhat secure. But again, there's always places where you have the one odd that leaves the two-factor authentication out. Is the way in.
I think we're sort of,
Sorry,
Yeah,
there are projects on trustworthy software and assurance. Having been an auditor to these things, it's easy to say to throw something out, but the reality is that that's biased. What can be seen as a non-fair sort of action. So again, it has to come from governance and trust, and the trust schemes that would oversee those industries. It's a very big subject.
You're right, and that's why you have auditors that.
And the EU has this OW2 that's looking into trustworthy software, and HMG are doing the same thing at the moment. So it's left hand and right hand.
I was just going to raise a sort of a thought more than a question. I mean, it's a question, you can just answer it, but much of what we've been hearing today and what we probably will hear later on this afternoon, more about cloud, is about preventing attacks and trying to recognise attack scenarios. But one of the things which I've been very aware of, being part of the information technology scene for the past 20 years, is that we don't yet know where the attacks are going to come from and how those attacks are going to manifest themselves, because only just, I think, about a month ago, Apple, Microsoft, all the big players had to make radical changes to a fundamental part of their code kernel to do with the time clock, NTP. Now we've always assumed, I've always assumed in my training, that NTP was one of those secure protocols that just simply does one thing, it sets time. But yet there was an attack vector that was discovered that could attack through NTP. And then that had to be changed through the kernels of every single operating system worldwide. So therefore it was an attack scenario that we could never have perceived. Now much of the internet that we use today was created 20, 30 years ago based on what was considered gold standard techniques, mostly based in Unix. How can we really prevent what we don't know? I mean, what's your take on that? Because you mentioned a very good presentation, but you've got lots of those very evil people out there, you know, wanting to do bad things to us, the corporations. How can we get into their mindset to prevent what they might do before even they know what they're going to do?
It's a good question. I think one aspect that really helps out is the corporations that you have with different security vendors. So you have various entities that are established between very big and very large security vendors that join forces to see anomalies in the network, define new tools and new malwares that they've identified, and basically share the knowledge between themselves. Yeah. And your government is doing the same thing. I mean, we're trying to force people to talk and exchange information, and that will maybe help mitigate some of that. And then it's just trying to outsmart, trying to think like they think, and think of the next step. There's always going to be flaws in code, even if you have an SPLC process in place. Yeah. There's always going to be flaws. Just got to be smart and fast to react.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
I think intelligence is the key, because 70% of crime now has an online element. So intelligence is the key. You have to accept that, you know, whether you're a small business or a large business or an individual, criminals are after your money or your intellectual property.
I agree. And setting this up once you have the infrastructure is peanuts. It's within 10 minutes, an organization can have a profile set up, and these crawlers and these automated task managers doing their work to collect information. And even if it mitigates 90% or 70% of the risk, it's something. And it's improving daily. So.
It used to be very easy just to download the hacking tools themselves. Has that door on that one been finally closed?
No.
It was really easy to
It's
download.
still
your own
really
hacking
easy.
tools.
It's still very easy. It's not. It's even more than that. Today, you can buy.
It's a business, isn't it?
A what?
It's a business now.
Yeah, you can buy a
Spend
botnet.
money and buy them.
You can buy a botnet. You can. There's
Yeah.
people in various countries. I won't mention them, but various countries that hire themselves as hackers.
Mhm.
So you don't have to use paid for tools that some tools know to recognize it. You can have people that are specially trained for that do the work for you. It's even easier.
That's sort of the question I was asking about earlier on. With all this billions of money coming out, and the easiest way is just to take it out, not through drugs, prostitution, slavery or anything like that, just to take it. But there's billions of pounds washing the world from all the rest of that. Some of it will go in bribery, some of it will go under the bed, but a lot of it, that much money has got to go back into the banking system somewhere. What's happening on the other side to stop fraud and hacking back so that the money gets washed and legitimately pushed back?
I don't know, but you see trends like using Bitcoin, which is a different, it's a parallel path to the normal finance industry that we know, and various other ways of taking the black money and turning it into white, which are being used. But you're right.
But they've got to do something illegal and somehow get it hacked back.
Everything that they're doing is illegal. It's not
Yeah.
something.
No, I mean, but by the time it's passed to the third bank, probably the third bank doesn't even know it's been washed money.
But one of the problems is not all hackers are evil. Some do it as a challenge. We see people coming out of university now who are very bright. They've got mobile phones, they do programming, and they see it more of a challenge. And one of the problems is with the cost of developing things, people want to get it to market very quickly. Now, in the old days, a real programmer, for want of a better word, could write in a very small amount of memory. Memory is so cheap now that they can write tons and tons of code. And the testing of that may not be as thorough as it used to be. So therefore, perhaps we need to look at the whole way that software development's done, because everything is related to cost, and things come out of the market. You can get things on the phone that do very good things, but they haven't been really tested to that nth degree. So you're always going to have these backdoors or ways of people being able to get in. That's a risk of software development.
Which is why on the good side, on the clients and the legal side, which is why we push all our customers to have some sort of SDLC process in place where they get both their coders and QA process validated. We have a customer that has a big problem with code leaving the QA process. So they don't want their code distributed before it's actually launched, and once it reaches the floor of the QA people, it finds its way out. And there's a different processes which can put in place both to secure the code itself, but also to protect the entire process. So it's all about three elements that make you secure.
And get those